Hi, everybody. It's the Poetic Warrior, Dale Walsh, coming to you from beautiful downtown Hackensack. And today I'm honored to have as our guest Dr. Pam Pappas, who is a psychiatrist of much experience, and she's now a coach too and a facilitator. And she's uh, she's basically she deals with doctors and professionals who are experiencing burnout and who are overwhelmed by their jobs. So, thank you, thank you for coming, Dr. Pappas. And I'm just going to read us a poem as I'm the poetic warrior. So, we'll be right with you. So, this is called Another Poem of Pure Devotion. And the romance I have conceived, you are a woman I have perceived, a core of my mind's eye, making me in dreams to sigh, as we play our games erotic, leaving behind all my tendencies psychotic. For you alone do I embrace as we fill our cuddling space, forgetting former heartaches without a trace of bitterness I used to carry, since my frustrations I now bury and the comfort of your bod, greatest gift to me from God, who does our relationship truly bless, so my life was previously mess of unrealized amour, hopes and dreams, as I plod with insane external schemes, living an existence of false infatuation, never knowing you were a cross nation, waiting to hold me in arms of infinite dedication full of charms. So that's what I call a rock set, and it's my own form. And welcome, Dr. Pappas. How are you today? It's a pleasure to see you.
Oh, thank you so much. I enjoyed the poem and thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, Dr. Pappas and I can I call you Dr. Pam? Is that okay? That
Dr. Pam, that's fine. Yeah, thank you.
okay? Well, Dr. Pam and I met in a course by Dr. Bill, who I had on the show earlier in the year, and she's like a dedicated follower. I don't know if that's the right word for it, but she's a dedicated follower of the three principles, which are universal mind, consciousness, and thought, which is a it's not even a philosophy; it's a truth found by a Scottish welder named Sidney Banks, who had a revelation and was touched by God and spent the last part of his life teaching the three principles. And maybe we should start there. What's your understanding, and how would you explain the three principles to someone who's new to the concept, Dr. Pappas?
Oh my gosh. That's a huge question. Real
Well,
that you want to put me on the spot and leave me there.
right off the bat, I'm sorry,
I'm,
I didn't.
no, I'm playing with you. You know, one thing came up as you were speaking. You said that I'm a dedicated follower of these three principles, and I realized at that moment one of the things that Sid talked about was that nobody should be a follower of anything or anybody. Because when you do that, you give up your own wisdom that we all have access to, and that he felt that his was no better than yours or mine, even though he's in another realm. I don't know what happens to us when we die
Right.
necessarily. I have some ideas from my own experience, but I don't know. But the idea of being a follower, I think, is really important because what he wanted us to do was to find our own natural way to live and to show up, and how his might look different than mine, you know.
Right. Well, I think you noticed I corrected myself when I said you were a follower, but I just
Well, you said that, and I thought, well, that's really smart because that's one of the things that Sid Banks really had. That was one of he had several very firm uh, expressions, but that was one of them. In fact, he didn't even want to be videoed until later in his life, because he was afraid that if he would, like, if people had a bunch of videos, that they would treat him like a guru. And that was
Right.
absolutely not what his intention was for any of this.
Well, that's one guruhood, and becoming a guru is like I think I've dealt with like a lot of programs and everything, and it seems like a lot of coaches really want to be gurus rather than coaches and be on sort of like be on a higher level of
Yeah.
than the people who they're teaching, supposedly teaching or coaching and everything. I think that's one reason I respect Sydney Banks so much. His book, The Missing Link, is something that people really should look up and try to follow. And it's a deceptively, yeah, it's a deceptively simple system. When you say the whole universe is composed of three elements: thought, consciousness, and mind. And people say, okay, fine, I understand that, but as Dr. Bill and you have discovered, it's a lifetime search for the real meaning of what those three elements consist of. At least that's what it seems like.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, because what Sid was talking about was something that was behind and before the words. It's a little bit like if you and I were out taking a walk right now and I saw a bird in a tree and I said, Dale, look over there. Look at this bird. If I want you to see the bird, I've got to point at it. And then it's up to you to take your vision from the end of my finger, look up in the tree, and see the movement or the color that I'm pointing to. And the problem is that a lot of people don't do that. They stop with the finger or the
Right.
word and don't go inside to that place where we can all be quiet inside and discover our own natural understanding of those words that he says. So he was talking about something formless rather than something that you can see necessarily. He's talking about what powers our understanding of ourselves and others in life, and how each one of us sees it a little differently and sees it differently at different times in our life. Have you ever had the experience of seeing somebody in one way one day and then a couple years later seeing them entirely differently?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's just part of us, my own evolution and the evolution of the other person, and especially if you don't see each other, you don't have contact, for 2 years, and you re-meet. Sometimes you hit it off, and sometimes it's just like, wow, we've changed so much that that we can't relate to each other.
Right. It's kind of like something's missing
Right.
in the conversation. But that's kind of what this is talking about, that the way we see what is outside of ourselves, might be a bird or might be another person, might be a situation, is determined by our thought generated perceptual experience that we're all having 100% of the time from inside out. And that is what he was referring to as the principle of thought, that's going on. And so you can understand that this is happening, but most of us don't realize that is going on. We think that our thoughts and our feelings are telling us about something that is outside of us. It's telling about the doctor that just gave them a horrible diagnosis, or um, put them on a medicine and they had side effects, or their spouse just left them, when actually the only thing that we can have an experience of is our own perceptual system, which might change from one time to the next, like you just described yourself.
Well, I think that's one of the revolutionary ideas that Sid like put forward, and as a lot of his other ideas, as time goes on, they seem to be justified, like validated more and more. For instance, just this idea that uh, everything that we see externally is a projection of our internal world, and that this inside out perception of things is has really become like a lot more accepted than it used to be, and it's all part of the evolution not only of mankind but also of people that in themselves, and just like I guess I mean, when you say everything is a reflection of the inside externally, then that a lot of balk balk at that idea because they say, well, there's so many things you can't control and everything, but the things that
Mm-hmm.
you can't control are, you know, part of part of your perception rather than absolutely uncontrollable.
Mm-hmm.
Is
Well,
that
it's a little bit, like, probably most people that are watching this, including you and me, are sitting in a chair. Are you sitting in a chair?
yeah, yes,
Well, yeah, I am too. And it's possible that your chair might be uncomfortable to me, or I would be uncomfortable in your chair. And you might feel similarly in my chair. But to you and to me, it feels just right, or else we wouldn't have picked that chair.
right.
So there is something real outside of us. There's the chair. But our experience of the chair, that's what makes the whole thing roll. And so if you carried it so far as to say, well, there's nothing real in the world, you'd be missing the boat,
Right.
because if there's an earthquake, that's pretty real, and it's not, it's outside of our control, like you were mentioning that. And we if we're awake to reality rather than in la la land, oh, there's no earthquake, then we can respond in a healthy, appropriate way to that earthquake. We can get in a door jam or something. What we have learned. I grew up in California. You're in Hackensack, New Jersey, but in California, when you're a kid, you learn where to get when there is an earthquake, and that it becomes a reflexive thing. Now, you may not have learned that in school, but uh, we learned that, and I've been through several earthquakes. I live in Arizona now, but that still was an early part of my experience. And if we're not living in la la land, then we can do what makes sense in a situation like that.
Right.
You know, um,
Well, so um, one of Sid Banks's big ideas is there's no such thing as illness. There's only mental health, and that's something that's always fascinated me. And the more I've studied him, the more I see where his point of view is. But having experienced, mental illness myself in an intense way, through my schizophrenia, the idea that mental illness doesn't exist is sort of like foreign to me. And
mm,
I mean, Sid says everybody has like a well of wisdom that they can call on, but when you're suffering from mental illness, a lot of times you just don't have the wherewithal to be able to call on that wisdom.
Yeah. Yeah, where the ill I think one place where there could be a meeting of the minds about this is to understand that mental illness itself is a concept. It, and by that I mean it's an idea that can change. It is not the same thing as the experience that you are having when you're having symptoms or I'm having symptoms. Mental illness, the concept of mental illness, has had a lot of evolution and studying and fighting over for many, many years. And there are diagnostic manuals that describe what they call the mental illnesses. But those are really only snapshots of what a person is experiencing at a given point in time. And it's not like a doom thing. Oh, you have this diagnosis, so therefore there is no recovery for you. That's in that concept, you can't say that. You can say, well, here's the snapshot. Dr. Pappas, you were depressed and you were hallucinating and you didn't sleep for 5 days. And because of that, you merit the diagnosis of, I don't know, mania.
Right.
But they can't tell beyond that what is going to happen with me in the future. They know certain medicines can help. They know certain kinds of therapies can help. But they cannot tell with definitiveness what is the outcome of me with that diagnosis. So in that way, that's what I think of when you say mental illness is a concept, and it's not cast in stone. Now, mental health is something that we all have, and there are examples of it all the time. Like, I think you were mentioning in one of our other times together, the decision to stay on medicines because you know that this is helpful for you, or it's been borne out in time that, and this is your decision, this is your assessment of how things are for you and what makes sense for you to show up and live your life. And you rely on the mental health that's in you to be able to make that choice. And I guess I don't see it as an either or. Either you believe in the three principles and don't take medicine because you don't need it, or you become a robot of doctors that put you on medicines. I don't see it that way. I see it as a synergistic.
Right. Well, uh, I know that I don't like big pharmas that much, but I'm also very grateful that I did find the medication that I did, and I mean, because in the past, when maybe it was because I would stop suddenly, but if I stopped my medication within 2 weeks, I'd be back in the hospital, and
Mm,
just to the point where I don't want to be in the hospital. I don't want to be sick, and even in my most psychotic, my healthy side and my ill side or my sick side or whatever you want to call it were like in like a battle to the death, and I always tried to support the healthy side, but sometimes that was very difficult.
I can imagine. And I've had a lot of patients that are in that kind of a dilemma. and sometimes feel less than because they they experience, like yourself, that if they stop a given medicine, that within a short time some of the symptoms are going to come back, and those are very scary for them, and they don't like being in that situation. So there's kind of a, I don't know, a tug of war between, oh God, I don't want to need this medicine, but I see this medicine, if I don't take it, I experience less of my life that I want. I end up in the hospital. I don't want to be in the hospital. So I think relationships with their doctors are really important at times like that.
Well, that's one thing I want to get into, Dr. Pam, is your work. I feel is very important because you're helping the helpers with you know with like helping doctors and professionals deal with burnout and other symptoms of other you know results of being dissatisfied with their practice and you know so what would you say is I don't mean to put you on the spot all the time, but
I'll tease you right back if you do, man.
but what is burnout the main cause of why doctors consult you, or are there other things like personal lives or I know we were talking yesterday when in our pre-interview about uh, doctors who are like just caught in a time squeeze and between the insurance companies not paying for medication and the pharmaceutical companies like demanding or basically telling the doctors how to prescribe and everything. And is that a big issue, or is it? Uh, what's your experience as a counselor or a therapist for that population?
Well, so it sounds like your question is, why would a doctor consult me? What might they be suffering or experiencing that they would ask for help from someone like me? And you said, well, is burnout the major thing, or is it, some of the other experiences that a doctor can have in practice? Not enough time, battling with insurance companies, some of that. And so, one thing that is important is to see that what they call burnout, that's also a concept. You know how we were saying mental illness is a concept and can change? Well, burnout is the same. And it can take a form that is a little different for each person. Now, the the idea of burnout consists of three main characteristics, and it can happen not just in medicine, but in about every other person and profession that there is. And the first one is exhaustion, and it's a physical exhaustion for in one sense, but it's also an emotional exhaustion, like so drug out that it's hard to even allow in more data. And that leads to the second criteria, which would be an experience of loss of compassion or a feeling of uh, unfamiliar, like deadness, when they used to really enjoy working with patients and seeing what that patient needed. And then a third one is a sense that what they're doing is not effective. And that can be horribly disheartening for physicians because most of them, almost all of them that I've ever dealt with, go into medicine because they sincerely want to be helpful to people. So if you can imagine studying for so many years and being a resident in psychiatry, so you have 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, 4 years of psychiatric residency, that's 12 years. And ending up in a situation where you feel like that what you're doing for these patients is not effective. Well, it feels horrible.
Very
So,
disempowering, right?
yeah. But like I said, medicine is not the only profession or situation in which somebody might experience that, you know. But you asked me about doctors. So that's one. But then there's a bunch of different contributors to developing that kind of a feeling. Some of it might be relative to the organization they're working for. Say the organization requires them to see a patient every 15 minutes. Well, if it's a simple problem that patient brings, maybe the 15 minutes will be enough to hear from the person what they need, do any kind of exam that needs to happen, and then prescribe appropriately. But in most psychiatry situations, it's not a 50. There's a whole lot of stuff that comes in with that. Even if I haven't been sick in a while, I'm going to still bring a bunch of baggage to a psychiatrist if I go. So from the get-go, that physician is relegated to a small period of time, smaller than what's needed to address effectively what that person needs. And so they're feeling awful about that. So if the organization creates that kind of a thing, and then also requires them to document on the computer while you're talking to them. I don't know if you've ever experienced that.
I have.
But for some of us, it really is off-putting. And others, well, okay, we know. Others, I've been to some doctors where they say, well, will you take a look at this with me? And we're looking at my x-rays. And then for me, it feels like I'm a part of the thing, a part of the situation rather than a distancing. So that doctor was smart about how they were using it. They were including me in the conversation rather than just looking at the computer and then I'm sitting over in some corner and being ignored.
Right.
But this is another feature. And some people consult me for personal issues, but the big thing to remember is the way that we show up as doctors is it's highly relevant to how we show up with a patient. The medicine you receive is it's in a pill or it's in a shot, but it's prescribed by a human being as a result of an interaction, some interaction that they've had with you, what you've shared with them. Here, these are my symptoms, and this is what this is what troubles me. And you hope there's enough understanding from the physician that they give you something that's useful. At least that's what I would hope for.
Right.
But what if the doctor is so tired, exhausted, compressed for time, brutalized by a healthcare system that is breaking down, that they can't hear you describe what is wrong? Then you're going to come out with probably a less than optimal treatment. So that's why this is all so important and ought to be to patients, because you want to make sure your doctor's rested, fed, paid on time. Because, they've got bills to pay just like you. Otherwise, you're going to be at war.
Right. Happy with their husband or wife. And
yeah, you want them to not have just had a fight as they were coming up in the door.
Right.
Or at least be able to be present with you and not have a bunch of other stuff on their mind. And so, this is a situation that when physicians are human beings, there's going to be some days that they're better than others, or they're more present than others. That's going to happen.
Well, that brings up another point to my mind is just that besides presence, just like having the time, because I was very fortunate in that I was in a program where I had like 3 individual sessions a week and 2 group sessions and everything. So I basically got the opportunity to get everything off my chest that was like causing the trauma or the to my symptoms and everything. But what I've experienced lately is that these doctors, as you say, they have 15 minutes to deal with a schedule full of patients, and they're just unable to like really be satisfied that they're doing the healing that they like to.
That is so true. And so, if you imagine putting a very creative, innovative, intelligent, loving person in a situation where they cannot do what they can see needs to happen, then they're going to feel inadequate, insecure, lousy. They're going to hate themselves. And sometimes they're going to hate the situation that they're in. And that is going to fog up the lenses, so to speak, of being able to hear you with the problem that you came to the clinic for.
Right.
There's a term, and I think I mentioned it to you yesterday, called moral injury.
Right.
That comes out of the military when you send young, well-meaning people into battle, and they end up in a situation that is counter to their ethics or their morals, but they're ordered to do things, or they see things done that are horrifying to them. Then they can come out of it with a sense of moral injury. Well, doctors can be in that kind of a response when they see or have to participate in care that they feel is subpar. This whole pandemic has put us in that situation where hospitals, at least in the beginning, were not providing the kind of protective equipment that nurses and doctors needed to have to safely treat individuals that had severe symptoms. There were nurses there. There were no gowns because they ran out, and they had to wear trash bags. I kid you not.
Right.
And so, and yet encouraged to, well, don't wear that mask. You're scaring the patients. Well, in a respiratorily transmitted illness, you don't wear a mask. That's like telling you to go into battle. That's la la land. That's crazy. But this is what some physicians and nurses have been subjected to. And you used the word demoralizing earlier, or disempowering. It is all that, every bit.
Right. Well, I guess I mean everybody talks about the strain on hospitals and everything that COVID has caused, but I think it's been like right across the board in the medical profession, because so many more people are becoming aware of like mental issues. I mean, just like the imposition of quarantines and not having like the distracting outlet of going to work every day and everything. And a lot of people have found that they like working from home, but a lot of other people have been suffering. And the spike in domestic violence was like extreme at the beginning, and and just like it's brought is one thing I see as positive is it's brought mental illness or mental health into a focus it never had before, so that people are really like starting to understand, and because they're now experiencing themselves rather than just like saying, well, that guy is a schizophrenic, or that guy is weird or anything, because the conditions have been changed so much that people are experiencing mental health, and that gets to the other side of things, is that as more people get aware of their mental illness, if you want to, their mental imbalance, then it overloads the psychiatric system too.
Well, you're absolutely true. And the thing is, I don't know if you know, maybe you do know this, but a lot of people don't. But at least 400, 300, 400 people, physicians, kill themselves every year. And that this has been going on not just this year or last year, but for many years. And it's not been in the open or explored or in the public view as it is now. So the suicide rate for military veterans is high, but for physicians, it's higher. And a lot of folks don't realize that. So there can be some positive in all this if we notice that mental health is super important to take care of, and looking at how do we do that. It's not just the medicines alone. There's a lot more than that goes into creating a life, as you've learned. It requires relationships. It requires productive work, or work that feels satisfying. It requires safe home to be in, adequate food, places to be comfortable for everyone, not just a few. And so the focus on mental health, I'm glad that it's there, and I still see some people kind of pointing the finger, oh, that person's weird, or this person, they need to not be here. We got to get rid of that person. Do you know when psychiatry first became a profession, they called a psychiatrist that dealt with people with these kinds of symptoms alienists?
I did know that, but I don't think
There's a novel that was written called The Alienist,
right.
and it was all about the kind of work that he did. But that was just the terminology. Well, you couldn't encapsulate it any better than that. These people, they're not like us. They're aliens. And we got to keep them over there and us over here where we're safe. Well, now we got to look at, just like you said, we got to look at all of us, because none of this is immune to suffering.
Well, I used to like to come up with definitions, and one of my definitions for schizophrenia was living in a reality that was not conceived on Earth.
Well, yeah, and it's your own created reality, isn't it?
Right.
Because your kind of schizophrenia, although it might have had some overlapping things with other people's, I bet you have some unique experiences that other people that have schizophrenia, theirs is a little different.
Well, that's one thing that I've been preaching for about a year, is that when I go on podcasts or talk to people, they say, well, what is what's the best way to deal with schizophrenia or something, and it's like, is you can't generalize because every case of schizophrenia is different. The example I use is A Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe's movie about John Nash, the mathematician. And people say, "Well, what do you think of that as a showcase for schizophrenia?" And I've never hallucinated. Either orally or visually, and so I would say it was a very good portrayal of schizophrenia, but it's not my schizophrenia. And my basic problem was my delusions rather than hallucinations and being. I mean, my delusions made me out of touch with reality, but I always said, my feet are always on the ground, and even if I think I'm God, then I'm still like living the 24 hours like everybody else.
Well, yeah. So that's healthy to recognize that. You know, that movie with Russell Crowe, that was a beautifully done one. But there are other uh, college professors who have given TED talks who also have had the diagnosis of schizophrenia and done very well in their profession. So it's a variable illness, a variable condition, and yours is not the same as theirs. So you're absolutely right that you can't blanketly globalize like that at all.
Right. Well, one of the mottos of the mental health warriors is in the stigma. So,
Mm,
the stigma that is around mental illness, and in England they call everything mental health, but I say mental illness. But the stigma around mental illness, I feel another thing that I talk about is the stigma isn't just from society and from outside in. A lot of people, myself included, I struggle with this for many years. Was the feeling of shame and guilt that I was a schizophrenic and that I had schizophrenia and that I brought it on myself by my drug use, and it was just like, and people say, well, you did drugs, and if you never done drugs, then you wouldn't have had this problem. But I can't say that because I think the drugs basically put off the illness for about 2 years until it just became too overwhelming.
that's an experience that I have heard other people describe as well. That there was an effort at self treatment, or to get relief from something that they were experiencing, and some of them use drugs. Well, there's a whole shipload of drugs that could be used. Um, and I know that in some situations it could probably make this thing worse. Like if they were using a lot of psychedelics, there could be some confusion between, well, is that my hallucination or is that brought on by the psilocybin or
Right.
the LSD? Well, I know what mine are like, and this is totally different. I think this is from that. Um, but you're right. They can't tell you exactly what would have happened if you hadn't done this and such. I mean, that's just that's another one of those concepts. It's not to ignore it, but to say, well, you can't foretell the future. We're notoriously bad at predicting the future from certain things.
And that also brings up I mean, this happened with me in the hospital when I was like in my most vulnerable. Is it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's the future you tell. People would say you're going back to the hospital, and say no, 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 and what you resist persists. And so I would
Mm.
end up in the hospital, and it's just like but that feeling of like being being pulled by a destiny into something that you don't want to do is
Yeah.
like very disturbing, and it's also very disheartening.
Yeah. Yeah. And it seems to me that it's also has to do with how you think of being in the hospital. Like if you think of, I mean, some people might look at the hospital and say, oh, my helpers are there and a safe place for me to be temporarily while I get my feet back on the ground again. I get my bearings. So they're going to, if they have that way of looking at the hospital, they're going to have a different feeling about it than somebody that says, well, I've got to be in the hospital, therefore I'm a real loser and I need to
But
feel ashamed.
I love
For,
the hospital. I called it the bridge of my spaceship.
oh my God. Okay. Captain Kirk.
It wasn't always easy going there, but even after I got out of the program, I was back at Fairleigh Dickinson and everything. I still self-admitted myself to the hospital like 6 times because I knew I was psychotic, and I just said I got to go to the hospital. There's no question about it, and uh, but I always, well, not always, but a lot of the time, I looked at the hospital as a safe haven from the demands of reality.
Hmm. Well, I guess when I was speaking, that there are those people that respond as you do, and I've also been in the position of having to commit people involuntarily because I could see that they were sick, even when the sickness itself made them not see that they were sick.
Right.
They just thought they were, omnipotent, and they were getting into or spending money that they didn't have, or getting into fights in bars that was actually physically dangerous for them to be. But for them, they that wasn't a problem. I was the problem. This person that was signing the commitment papers. So it's a variable situation, isn't it?
It is, and it's heightened, but the difficulty is heightened by the fact that you're never going to see eye to eye, or very rarely you're going to see. I mean, there were times when I totally disagreed with my doctor putting me in the hospital, but I still went just because I knew it was easier to go than to fight it. But and then I would have a great time in the hospital. And one thing I'm very proud of, Dr. Pam, is I was hospitalized 15 times and I made it out 15 times.
Good for you. But you said you didn't see eye to eye with your doctor. Were you ever able to have a conversation and him or her explain what they saw and you explain what you saw?
Well, that's usually what the conversation would be when I was in the hospital.
Ah, well, I was thinking of like after you got out and things were a little more in
Uh,
order.
uh, yeah, well, I mean, he would always like take, when I wasn't in the program, I would go to the hospital. He'd say, "Now you have to come see me once a week for, a while," and it was just like, well, this is part of my therapy, and I mean, I had a basic trust of him, but I also didn't trust him completely. I saw him as human, and and with his own prejudice and his own agenda, actually. And I felt that sometimes I was just in conflict with his agenda, and he would like put me in the hospital to basically show his power.
Oh,
That might not be justified, but that's how I felt. And it's like,
yeah.
when I was in the program, I felt sometimes that I was put in the hospital because it was easier to put me in the hospital for causing all these psychic problems with my fellow programmees, rather
Wow.
than having all the other people go to the hospital.
That is possible, I suppose. It's so as you're seeing it, that hospitalizing you was pragmatic, more practical, even if you didn't personally think you needed it.
Well, a lot of times when I went to the hospital, I really felt that I was reaching a new level of awareness and enlightenment, but it was just like such a strain on the other people for me to like normalize that I would be put in the hospital and I would finish the normalization process, but
Oh,
without the strain on the other people in the program.
wow. That must have been a tough situation for you.
It was
You're trying to grow, and you're in the hospital because you're trying to grow.
right.
Mm.
And I guess in some ways it was all part of my delusion, about being God and everything. But uh, I mean, for when I was in the program, I would like come to points where, and Doc and I would talk about this about the need to be God, and instead of and just the need to be the person the being that I said I was, and how that was in conflict with everybody else's earthly perceptions.
Mm. Mhm. Mhm. Well, I think Sid Banks would probably say that all of us are God.
I
Probably
do,
not meaning it quite like you're talking it, but in a certain way, um, in terms of what we come from, the the intelligence of the entire universe that we are made of, which is basically love. That's what it would boil down to. But we all come from that, and so you don't. It's not you being special to have that.
right. Well, when I first got sick, I would tell my psychiatrist in my first hospital, I'd say, I might be God, but God just wants to be one of the guys.
That's good. Well, that's perfect, especially coming out of a with a New Jersey accent like that. That's good. I
Well, I
love it.
didn't have the Jersey accent back then, but I would just say, I mean, my whole when I was going through my first psychotic break that got me taken away from Dartmouth, that was like the guiding thought. I might be God, but God just wants to be one of the guys and like to be accepted as a normal human being. And it's like, and then I got taken away, and like my whole life got put on a parallel track.
Sounds to me like what you wanted very, very much is what we all want. We want to be accepted and loved for what we are, as one of the guys or one of the gals, just one of the fellow human beings, even though we have different ways of seeing things than other people might, you know. And
Right.
so that's a natural human longing.
Well, it was really a desire for universal love, I think.
Well, it's for universal love, but also to feel accepted by, you know, somebody that's like right in with you. I mean, there's the spiritual aspect of it, but boy, it just feels good to get a hug,
Right.
and you can't forget that part. I think that sometimes we can get so spiritual that we forget that. Well, no, wait a minute, we're
Right.
material.
We gotta hug ourselves every once in a while.
Well, if it helps a little bit, I guess,
Right. But okay, well, thank you. The time has really flown by, Dr. Pam. But thank you very much. We got about 3 minutes left. But one thing I'd like to say before we leave is, I know you're going to be disappointed, everybody. But next week I'll be off. I won't be on the show. But as for because I'm going on my first trip out of Hackensack in 8 years. So I
Woohoo.
guess I'll see you in 2 weeks. But Dr. Pam, do you have anything to say about how people can contact you, or or any closing thoughts that you like to bless us with?
Well, well, I don't know if you put my little bio
I
on
did.
your things, and because it has my email address and my website, and I just want to tell you I've enjoyed this conversation with you very much. I think we've explored a lot of important things, and I appreciate your invitation.
Well, it's been a real pleasure, and as I said, we met in Dr. Bill's class, and I was always impressed with your insights and in your discussions, and this conversation's were gone all over the place, but I hope there was a running theme to it and that you enjoyed it.
I did, and I hope you have a great time on your vacation.
Well, I think it's only 4 days, but as I say, I'm going to Lake Tahoe, and I'm going from New Jersey to California, so be on the other side of the nation. And they say Lake Tahoe is beautiful, and so I'm really looking forward to it. But thank you very much for joining me today, and I hope we can keep in touch.
Thank you.
Let me just uh, run this.